Are there any papers, I should have asked? And there are no papers. Are there any select committee reports? No select committee reports either. Are there any bills for introduction? No bills for introduction. The House then comes to questions for oral answer. And the first question stands in the name of the Honourable David Parker.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, there's been an error in my office and the word deficit should appear after the word account. I seek leave to insert the word deficit after the word
Leave
account.
is sought for that course of action. Is there any objection? There is no objection. The Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and to the House for leave. Does he accept the BNZ statement that New Zealand's increasing current account deficit is, and I quote, a very clear risk for New Zealand's credit rating with Standard & Poor's?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the current account is a factor, obviously one factor in credit ratings. If it was to climb to the levels of deficit last seen in, say, 2008, it reached 8.8%, that could be a risk, depending on what else was happening in the economy. I would note, however, that both Treasury and Reserve Bank forecasts for the current account deficit have it tracking significantly lower than the BNZ. At its current level of 4.8%, the current account deficit is well below the level seen at its peak, but does remain, of course, a significant area to work on. And that is why this government has a comprehensive program to get back into surplus, make our economy more competitive, lift savings and turn around the strong imbalances that have persisted over several decades.
The Honourable David Parker.
Did today's GDP figures show that imports are up and exports are down?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I don't think that today's GDP figures interpreted either of those necessarily on their own. What it did show is that the growth in the March quarter was very broad-based, including both the manufacturing, agricultural and services sector, and was therefore very positive for the wider New Zealand economy.
The Honourable David Parker.
Do the forecasts from the Treasury, the Reserve Bank, the IMF, the ANZ and the BNZ all forecast the current account deficit getting worse because the cost of imports is rising faster than the value of our exports?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I can confirm the first part of that question is that they do forecast an increase in the balance of payments deficit over the next couple of years for a number of reasons, one of the most significant ones being the imports required for the rebuild in Christchurch. But there is also other indicators as well. It's important to note also, though, that the Treasury numbers peak at well below what we saw in the last decade, where they were getting to quite worrying levels of around the 8 to 9%, particularly in the last couple of years of the previous government.
The Honourable David Parker.
Has he seen the BNZ report that our current account deficit rising as it is risks another credit downgrade? And how does he reconcile the risk of a credit downgrade with his comments about underlying strength in the economy?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think all forecasters are having their challenges at the moment, including the bank, in terms of their expectations for GDP growth. Of course, they turned out to be quite different today, just a day later. But I would also, in terms of referring to the report which I have read, point out that it does say very clearly is that the government must remain hell-bent on achieving surpluses, so that the ratings agencies do not have the excuse of twin deficits to downgrade our sovereign debt, and I can assure the member that the government remains very focused on that, I have to say, in contrast to the opposition.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Has the Minister seen Stephen Topless, Bank of New Zealand Head of Research, comments on the current account deficit when he said, quotes, "Not only is this a direct threat to the New Zealand dollar, it is also a very clear risk for New Zealand's credit rating, with Standard & Poor's in particular having recently placed great emphasis on the current account progress. And given that and other comments, why would a Minister of Finance wish to remain in office, and should he not have been sacked a long time ago?"
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, I sort of repeat the answers to earlier questions in the same vein, is that yes, it has widened, but nothing like what it was under the previous government before they left obvious, where it went to 8.8%. Well, I think it's working a heck of a lot better than the previous government's plan. Of that we can be quite sure.
Question number 2, Shane Arden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks,